Very good afternoon to everyone. I'm Srinidhi here, and welcome to the third series of Productivity. With me today, I have Navneet Nair. He is Director of Product Design at PhonePe. And today we'll be talking on the topic, what is a prototype and how does it work? Thank you so much, Navneet, for joining with us today.
Thank you, Srinidhi. Hi, I am Navneet Nair. As Srinidhi said, I am Director of Product Design at PhonePe, lead the design team over there. And I have been designing software for about 20 years now. And over this time, I have seen a fairly large number of design processes. And some of the best companies that I've worked for, some of the best processes that I've worked with, always has this one component which is absolutely essential, and that is doing prototyping. So today what I'll do is I'll probably start off with a small bit of background on what prototypes are, why one should be doing prototypes, what are the advantages, disadvantages of doing prototypes, what are the different types of prototypes, and maybe a little bit about how to how do most companies do prototypes, especially when it comes to building software products. But largely, I want this talk to be open to so you can have questions. So Srinidhi, I'm sure people can post questions, and then we'll moderate the questions, and I can take any questions as it comes.
Definitely. So, would you like to do it as we proceed, or would you want it to be at the end of the session?
I don't mind it people posting questions as we do, but I may take them. So I don't have too much to talk about. I'll talk about maybe give you an introduction for about 10-15 minutes, and then I would want to just open it up and have people ask questions.
Awesome.
So people can
Yeah.
start posting questions as and when if they find something interesting that is coming out of what I'm speaking, something that doesn't make sense to them, please do post the questions and we'll just take it up.
All right, sure.
Yep. So the first thing I want to start off with is exactly why do we need prototypes? And to do that, I think one of the important things to understand is how does product design, or rather, how does the software uh, design process work in most companies? When we start to build software, I don't know if this resonates with what happens in your organization. Typically, you start off with an idea. The idea comes from multiple sources. It might come from a designer. Very sometimes it does happen. But a lot of times it comes from the CEO. It might come from a business requirement. And a lot of times it comes from what is out there in the market. A lot of times you look at competition, you say, okay, this is what it comes up with. But everything typically starts off with an idea. And once there is an idea, the first thing that people want to do is come up with what is known as a business plan. As in, will this idea actually make any money? And typically you say, okay, I think this is the idea. I feel I'm going to have 10,000 users using it, or 50,000 users using it, or I'm going to get 1 million users out of this idea. I don't know. But this is what I predict that this idea is going to come up with. You have a business plan around it. And once you have the business plan, typically a product manager gathers the business plan from people who are leading the business. It could be the CEO, the marketing, actual business development folks who are there in the team. They would take the idea, said, okay, let me gather requirements around it. Requirement gathering might be from actual users. Very rarely does that happen. It might be from stakeholders. It might be from different people within the team. You gather the requirements around it, and pass on the requirements to a designer, who then designs what the product or the feature should look like. And at the end of it, it's handed over to engineering, who go ahead and build it. And at this point, if somebody calls themselves an agile organization, they'll say, oh, I'm going to get this done in 1 sprint, get this done in 2 sprints. And you go about building the feature and eventually shipping it. And this is a typical process that runs within an organization, no matter what they call themselves, whether they call themselves a lean organization or not. But what this process typically is an age-old waterfall development process, wherein you start off going step by step. and you go through stages, and at the end of one stage it is handed off to the next stage, and then you go about building the product. And typically this is the wrong way to build any product, because what happens with the business case, and this is often called the fallacy of a business case, is that you really can't know what you don't know, right? So in the case of a business, when you're creating a business case, so you have an idea, the very first step is creating the business case, and you are making an assumption that this is going to get me 10,000 users, and those 10,000 users are going to pay me $500 each for this particular piece of feature or software that I'm building. Or you're going to say, I'm going to get about 1 million users and all of them are going to give me $10 each. How are you making this assumption? There is absolutely no way that anybody in their sane mind can actually put their money where the mouth is just based on an idea. And this is typically a problem that is not addressed. It is glossed over. Most of the time, people are happy. There is a wisdom within a small bunch of users that says, yes, what this guy is saying makes sense. Oh, the last time that project that product that was built, uh, the guy was fairly accurate. I'm sure this particular hypothesis is accurate enough. So you go on people's words, you go on people's experience. A lot of the times it may make sense because experience does build within you a sort of a gumption that you can keep using over and over again. But it is not the truth, especially in situations like this when there is a huge change in the environment. I mean, today, when we come out of all of this coronavirus situation, and I hope we all do fairly quickly, we are not going to be living our lives just the way we did. And if you're going to make assumptions based on what we already know, I can guarantee you that almost 90% of those assumptions will be false. So, in a situation like this where things are changing, what is it that we can do in terms of uh, going ahead and making certain assumptions which are necessary? I'm not saying that a business case is not necessary. It is absolutely necessary to have a business case before you proceed. You need to understand where it is coming from and how much money it is going to make before you invest resources into it. You need to know whether you're going to get something out of it. But then to do that blindly is not the right way to do. So, what can we do about it? So the best thing to do about it is to do something that can be quickly done and put an estimate out that you can use and then build something about it. And this is what a prototype actually does. So why do you need a prototype? A prototype answers this question for you: should we build it? So even before you build it, the prototype is important to answer the first question: should we build it? What happens when you build a prototype? What are the benefits of having a prototype? A prototype tells you what will work. A prototype tells you what will not work. A prototype will tell you how difficult it is going to be or how easy it is going to be to build that thing. And it may, to some extent, tell you how much money it's going to make. Based on all of this, you can prioritize the idea and say, yes, this is an idea worth doing it. I need to get it out in my next release. Or no, I think this is a good enough idea, but I don't think we need it on top of all the things that we have already planned for. Or you might even say, no, this is not worth building it. And you will save a lot of money on resources, and you can put them back into things that are actually important for you. So the advantages of having a prototype is that basically you don't go in blind. You actually know what is necessary in terms of building it. And you are basically not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because what happens sometimes is that you build a product and see that the product is not working, and you just discard the product, whereas some part of the product or the feature might have actually worked. And sometimes the thing is that because the feature did not work, I think the whole feature is crap, let's do away with it. Whereas having this done in a manner in which you build it in a smaller way, you actually can evaluate, oh, these are parts that are working and these are parts that are not working, and you can improve upon it. And the way we work today, I think it's a given that all of us believe in the iterative model of working, especially in the kind of products that we build. We are not building monolithic products. We are not building, most of us are not building cars and so on, where once you have done something, it's really difficult to change it. We build software products, and the very good thing about software products is that you can go ahead and make iterations on it in a matter of 2 weeks or a month, depending on what kind of release cycle you have. And especially in this kind of an iterative environment, you need to know what is working and what is not working, and you can't just throw things out and keep building things all over from scratch. So this is what a prototype helps you. So the benefits of a prototype and the disadvantages of not doing a prototype are fairly clear in terms of, the fact that it answers the question: should you be building what you plan to build, and how do you want to prioritize? So that said, what is a prototype? So roughly speaking, there are about 5 different types of prototypes. The very first prototype is what is known as a concept prototype, or it's a feasibility prototype. A feasibility prototype typically is something that is built by a bunch of engineers who come in and then they say, let me see if this particular thing works. For example, if it's a chat feature, a feasibility prototype might be something that just allows somebody to have a text box on one side and a screen on the other side, and somebody typing in the text box and it coming up immediately on the other side. That is the kind of feasibility that you're talking about. It doesn't talk about whether the project will, whether the product will be used or the feature will be used, but whether is it technically feasible to do something like this. Chat is of course something that we all know that it works, but it could be something much more advanced in what you're trying to build. It could be a feature that is not out there yet, and you want to know whether is it technically feasible to build something like that. So this is where a feasibility prototype comes in. There are times that a product manager would definitely get involved in something like this. Very few times designers might get involved in it, especially if it's an idea that the designer has come out with. But primarily, a feasibility prototype is something that the engineers would build, because a lot of it has to do with the technological feasibility of the product or the feature. The second part, which is something that is fairly falls within the designer's realm, is what are known as low fidelity prototypes. A low fidelity prototype comes in very early in the stage of when you have the idea, and typically you should everybody should be doing low fidelity prototypes. It could be something that you draw on a whiteboard. It could be something that you draw out on paper. uh, Designers would love to do wireframes. You don't need to do wireframes in the sense of making it look nice, but it is something that is done so that it saves time. So the whole idea of a low fidelity prototype is to save time, but get it out in front of people, show it to them, and get feedback on that. The advantages of a low fidelity prototype is that things get done fairly quickly. It can be done with very little amount of knowledge or skills that are required. But at the same time, low fidelity prototypes can't be used for testing with people who have absolutely no context about what is coming. It is very risky to take low fidelity prototypes out in and show it to somebody out on the street and say, what do you think about it? They might comment on things that you are not expecting to comment. So typically a low fidelity prototype, you will gather responses from people who have a fairly uh, a, a fair amount of context of what the product is. So that is the second type of prototype. So you have concept prototype, second is low fidelity prototype, and the third one, again coming from the point of view of fairly designer led, is a high fidelity prototype. A high fidelity prototype is something that all of us probably are used to building most of the time. We call them mocks, uh, but there are number of tools out there that you can use to build mocks, but also stitch them together. Today, you could use Figma, you could use InVision, you could use Marvel, you could use any of the tools out there, stitch them together. It gives you a very good understanding of what needs to be built, how it will look. To some extent, in fact, it might even give you how it will function. But to a large extent, these are prototypes. They might take you through one flow. Most of the time, it's a happy flow. A happy flow is something that you say that, oh, there is nothing wrong that is happening over here. We kind of understand what the user needs to do they do that particular flow. It takes them through that flow. Uh, the advantage of having a high fidelity prototype is that it gives you a fairly good idea of what you can expect out of the actual product or the feature that you are building. It actually you can take it out to a lot more people. They can take a look at it, give you feedback. The disadvantage being that it takes a little extra time, and most of the time you design for happy flows without taking into account what would happen in the scenario where the user is not able to perform the action that is needed, does not see the information that is there, or something wrong goes with the user's mental model. So then comes the fourth type of prototype, which is a live data prototype, which is primarily a step above a high fidelity prototype where you're actually using real data. To some extent, you do need uh, some amount of engineering effort to fit the data into it. This could be somebody you work with. For example, you could build an Android prototype that works with real data in the background, or you could use one of the more advanced prototyping tools where you can bind it to a database, get real data out of it. And this, of course, takes much longer than a high fidelity prototype also, but at the same time, it gives you a lot of data. Finally, the last one, which kind of is somewhere in between, is kind of like a hybrid prototype where you take some amount of data, some of it, you build more screens around it. It functions somewhere in between a live data prototype and a high fidelity prototype. So typically about five different levels of prototypes, depending on what you want to build, what stage that you are in. You may want to choose between all of these different types of prototype that you are building. And last part of what I want to talk about before I'll open it up for questions is how do you build prototypes? Actually, there are a number of ways that you could build prototypes. You could just use a pen and a paper, draw out on that, and that itself is your prototype. Or you could go further, like I've described the 5 levels of prototypes. You could be doing it in a tool like Sketch, or something better like Figma, where it actually allows you to link it up, host it, and then have people look at the various interactions that are there. It can do animations for you if you wish. That makes it look fairly realistic. Make it available on your device itself, or you could use a tool like what I love, a tool called Protopie, which actually allows you to build fairly complex prototypes. And that's another way of building it. Or you could actually be working with somebody who is an Android developer, or uh, or Android developer and iOS developer, and actually work with them to build a live data prototype, or maybe a web developer if you're doing web-based products. So these are the various ways in which you could build prototypes. I will That's pretty much what I want to talk about. So primarily the reason you would want to do a prototype is to answer the question, should we build what we plan to build? So at this point, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Uh, Hi Navneet, Arvind here. I would like to know the differences between POC, minimum viable product, and prototype. Can I have your perspectives on that?
Yeah, sure. So a POC is a proof of concept. A proof of concept ideally is a feasibility product. So it tells you whether you can actually do a, a product like that or not, right? A minimum viable product is a concept that has come out of lean, uh, the agile lean methodology of building it. And it talks about what is it that you put out in the market as quickly as possible. Now, if you have read up on this topic by Marty Kagan, so there's a wonderful writer named Marty Kagan. He's written this very nice book called Inspired. I would recommend this book very highly. Marty Kagan basically says an MVP is not a product but a prototype. So the whole idea of the MVP is to put something out quickly so that you can gather feedback. It can very well be done with any of the 5 types of prototypes that I have described as well. So we should not be waiting to build a minimum viable product which is not going to be liked by people because it looks like something that the cat brought in. Rather, you can actually take out a high fidelity prototype, test it out, and actually go back and say, yes, this works, and the market is ready for it. We can go ahead and build it, or you can go ahead and say that yes, this works, but there are certain changes needed to it, and come up with the answer to it. Just 1 second.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
Yep,
Um,
I think I got the answer. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. All right.
so we have one question on the chat. This
Yeah.
is from Nikhil. He's asking, in your perspective, what would be the best stage of prototype to get feedback validation from the target audience of the product?
The prototype actually is very early stage. So whenever you have the prototype ready, please get it out and get a validation. Like I said, there are multiple levels. If you have a low fidelity prototype, please don't take it to people who don't have context about it, because you may not get the right kind of feedback that you want. But at any point you feel that it is ready, take it. You will get feedback. Don't take the feedback in complete because you will have to take multiple feedbacks out of it, and because it is statistically not significant, because the number of people that you will ask is going to be small. You will have to take all the feedback that you get with a little bit of pinch of salt. But what usually happens is that if you are able to get about 10 people to answer, look at the prototype, and you're getting a similar sense out of it, you are on the right track. So get it out as early as possible. We have another question. How is prototype testing done remotely, or is it or to be specific, how is during this time, how is it being done? That's a very good question to ask, because you are in a situation where you really can't go and get your prototypes tested in person. So there are a number of tools out there that allow you to do remote testing. The one that I'm quite familiar with is one that is called Lookback. Lookback allows you to do testing, and you can use the user's camera to look at how the reactions of the user are, and actually get some testing done on it. So there are tools out there. Lookback is not the only one. There are others as well that are out there, that will allow you to do uh, testing done in this case, especially during the pandemic where you can't go out and do actual physical usability testing.
Got it. Got it.
Any other question that is out there? Yeah, so you want a YouTube link of a talk. I would recommend a talk, any talk by Marty Kagan. Listen to a talk on Mind the Product. There's a talk by Marty Kagan where he talks about uh, his process in general. But I would actually recommend to read the book, which is it's called Inspired. Inspired is the book, and the another one that I would another talk that I would recommend is Tom Chi. He used to be uh, he used to work at Google X, and some of he's designed the Google Glass, etc. So you can actually listen to his talk on prototyping and how he did the prototyping for Google Glass. It's quite fascinating. So another question of yours is, after doing the high fidelity prototype, did you get feedback from your audience? How much of it is necessary? See, once you do the prototype, if you just build a prototype and keep it for yourself, it serves no purpose. You really have to take it out to the users and get some testing. How much of testing would you do completely depends on you, your organization, and the time that you have to develop. So I would say that even if it is very little, just getting it done is more important than not building a prototype and not doing it. How much time should be allowed to build the prototype? Here again, it is about how much time do you have in the process itself. Sometimes there is absolutely no time. For example, your sprint is going to go out in the next 2 weeks, and that is the time that somebody comes up and says, oh, this is brilliant idea that I have, I need to build it. And if you really believe in that particular idea, might go ahead, build it. It is not a matter of uh, you know uh, if you don't build the prototype, it's not as though it is going to be the end of your system. So it's okay at times, but usually you would at least want to have some time to build it. So typically what I recommend is to have a two stream or a dual track or a tri-track system, wherein the design team is working at least 1 or 2 sprints ahead of the development, and which time you get enough time to build the prototype. What is the magic number of users that you test with? This is the magic number for any usability testing, is about 6. As long as you get about 6 people giving you the same type of answers, you are on the right direction. What do you think of the idea of low fidelity prototype and user research goes for a toss when you are in a highly competing market? So here again, the low fidelity prototype, the reason I say is that don't take it to people with little context is because sometimes people might end up responding to things that you don't want them to. However, with a caveat, this completely depends on the kind of person who's doing the research. So if your researcher is a good researcher and they are able to handle and ask the right set of questions, you might even take out a low fidelity prototype and get amazing results out of it. So it is not to say that low fidelity prototypes are useless, but rather it depends on who is the researcher that is doing the research. And just to add to it, I think generally speaking, it's not a good idea for the designer to go and do their own research. So sometimes it is always good to have somebody else on the research team who can actually go ahead and get some good feedback on it. because as a designer, you do carry with you your inherent biases. So it is always good to work with a researcher within the team. You want videos, links? I could post it the moment I can think about it. Yes, I'll post it a little later.
Navneet, one question on how much time generally a prototype should take. What is the sweet spot? I think, I mean, it definitely depends on the context, but in general, what do you think is a good time to build a prototype?
So you mean to say how long does it take to build a good prototype?
Yeah.
So how long does it take to build a prototype? Absolutely depends on the kind of prototype you're building. So if you're building a high fidelity prototype, depending on the kind of tools you have. So let's say you are working with an organization that has got a fairly robust design system in place and everything is available. You can even fairly easily build a high fidelity prototype. It should not take you that long. However, if you're a new very early stage startup, then it might take you longer even to build a high fidelity prototype, in which case you might start off with a low fidelity prototype and then move on. But at the end of it, these days, especially if you're using a tool like Figma, it doesn't take very long to build high fidelity prototypes. So I have gone from concept to actually doing a roadshow and a conference within, including hiring a team of designers in something like a month and a half. So that is the speed at which you can actually build a prototype, come up with a concept, build a prototype to such a level that people think it is the actual product out there, even sell the product. It is possible to do it within that kind of a time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, in an agile environment, if the sprint cycle is small, where you don't have enough time to test and iterate, what should we test the prototype of? Okay, how do you work within an agile environment? Typically, when you work within an agile environment, the idea is that you take up something from your board and you say, okay, this is the user story I'm working on, and you finish it off within that sprint. It doesn't give you enough time. It doesn't give you enough time to do design testing, then build it out and actually test it out even before you ship it. It doesn't give you enough time, which is why I recommend having a dual track model. If possible, a tri-track model. A dual track model is where you actually have a sprint that takes care of the design, which works at least 1 or 2 sprints ahead of the development sprint. So that is a typical model that you would want to work with. It's not exactly a waterfall model, but it is something in between agile and waterfall, because you need that lead time where you can do the design, test it out, and then tell the development team that yes, this is something that we have tested out. Go ahead and build it in the sprint that you're building it. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Any other questions that are there? In your view, using code tools like Glide Apps, Bubble.io for MVP and startups. So no code tools. So no code tools, I have personally not used no code tools. So I don't have any opinion on any of them. The only thing I would say is that in this case, when you're building something from no code, it is typically throwaway because it is not scalable. In I would assume it is not scalable. I don't know, but I would assume it is not scalable. If that is the case, what you're building for an MVP is pretty much the prototype. I would endorse the fact that go ahead and build it if it saves you enormous amount of times. But if you are working with some rockstar engineers who are able to actually build some fairly good code for you in the same amount of time, please do that, because that is better. But don't spend too much time building the MV product, as in the minimum viable product, but build a prototype, go out with the prototype, test the prototype, come back and then build the product. Yeah. other questions that are there? Yeah. Is that kind of it? Let me try and search for the Marty Kagan talk. Okay, this is a good one. Sorry for that sound, but I'm going to just paste this YouTube link over here. Yeah. Okay. Your PhonePe experience for a high fidelity or a low fidelity prototype. So at PhonePe, so far, I have been trying to get into a process of building prototypes. So what we do is we do a fair amount of, there are times when we do high fidelity prototypes. And what we do is we work with Android engineers or iOS engineers. We can get, so there is already a platform that is available for us where we can do the implementation. So for example, when we were doing work on our chat interface and stuff, you want to test a few things out. Actually tested it with building a Android version of it and then testing it out. So that was a high fidelity prototype that we built out and tested out. We haven't done a lot of low fidelity testing, so that is not something that I've done so far. So it's but it's a process that we are building at PhonePe. We're kind of getting into a more testing kind of a thing, and it's not. I mean, with any organization, it does take time. You need to build up the team. Like I said, it's not always possible for designers to be going out and testing their own designs. You do need somebody who can help you out with research as well.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, Navneet, for your time on the call. It was a really great session, and thank you so much for the insights. Just one last question that I thought I'd ask. You said people to test with would be somewhere around 6. Any reason or logic with which you
this is again, yeah, this is coming from usability testing from a number of studies. So what people have found is that 6 to 8 people, once you test, even if you go and take your number of people that you test, and so if 6 to 8 people are coming up with the same set of feedback and you increase it to say 20, 25, you will still get the same set of feedback. So this is a heuristic that is there.
Understood.
And this is coming from usability studies. So I'm just extrapolating it and saying, even with prototypes, when you're testing it out, if you're getting the same amount of feedback, same kind of feedback from 6 to 8 people, that is good enough for you. Don't have to go ahead and test it with 50 other people.
Makes sense. All right. All right. So, right. All right. Great. Thank you so much, Navneet, for your time.
Thank you.
It was a lovely session, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
We'll soon be releasing this in our YouTube channel, but do give us some time to go through the editing process as well. So thanks once again, and have a lovely day, all of you.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Stay safe.
Thanks, Navneet.